I would like now to present, if I could, our moderator for today, and that is Brother Alberto Parisi. He's a Cambodian missionary. He has a lot of work in dealing with justice, peace, and care for the integrity of creation with the methodology of see, judge, and act. He's taught this to pastoral ministers and to civic leaders, and he's going to engage us now in this session around creative initiatives and encounter and dialogue. So please, Brother Alberto, we look forward to this session as our moderator.
Thank you very much, Sheila, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody, according to the place in the world from which you are connecting. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you our first speaker of today. Let me share my screen. Here we are. So our first speaker is Brunno Ssennyondo, who is a Ugandan Catholic priest and a member of the Society of Missionaries of Africa, commonly known as White Father. He was born in Uganda in 1975 into a Christian family, and he joined the Missionaries of Africa in 1996. And did his studies in philosophy in Uganda. He first came into contact with the Senufo people in the year 2000 during his 2 years pastoral experience, which are part of their formation program. And today he's going to share, about his work among the Senufo people. He then studied theology in Toulouse, south of France, and in 2006, he was ordained a priest in his native country. Brunno's first appointment as an ordained priest was to the parish of Diou Kadiolo, Diocese of Sikasso in Mali. He remained there until 2014, when he was again sent for studies, this time to the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, England. At the end of his master's degree in anthropology, Brunno returned to Mali, where he is currently the director of the Research Center for the Protection and Promotion of the Senufo culture in Sikasso. So, Father Brunno, you are most welcome. You may start sharing your screen and start your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. I feel privileged to participate in this Creative Initiatives reflection. So my sincere vote of thanks goes to the organizers of this online reflection who have permitted me to participate in it. I'm speaking to you from the Senufo Cultural Center. It is a research center for the protection and promotion of the Senufo cultural values. It is located somewhere in Mali, in Sikasso particularly, somewhere there, southern part of Mali, in Sikasso, and Sikasso is the most populated region of Mali with around 3,200,000 inhabitants. That is around 18% of the Malian population. So the Senufo Culture Center is an initiative of the late Father Emilio Escudero, who was a missionary priest from Spain, belonging to the Society of the Missionaries of Africa, commonly known as the White Fathers. And I happen to be part of that missionary society. So this center is a result of more than 40 years of research work. It was finally inaugurated in the year 2005 in November, and it was directed by its founder, Father Emilio, until his death in November 2012. So this center has three major objectives. First, is to contribute to the protection and promotion of the Senfo culture in particular, and the local cultures in general. Secondly, it is to encourage the Senfo people to remain open to other social cultural realities that are likely to contribute to their integral development. And thirdly, to foster the spirit of encounter and dialogue between people of different religious expressions. And these activities, these objectives are achieved through a number of activities. I will simply mention 4 of them, the major ones. The first one is research. Thanks to the research exercise, the center has more than 1,200 collections in its museum. It also has a stock of more than 600 audio and video recordings on different themes concerning the life of the Senfo people, right from birth to the final state of life, which is death, for those who don't know. Another activity is welcoming people. Our center welcomes visitors of all categories, such as researchers, tourists, pupils, and students at different levels and from different institutions. While some come to visit the center's museum, others come to participate in the activities organized by the center. The third activity is that of the social cultural events. Our center organizes and participates in quite a number of events, such as workshops, conferences, exhibitions, festivals, and many other social cultural events. And lastly, for the publication or the diffusion of information. Basing on the results of our research work, our center regularly publishes books and other documents in order to make its work known to the general public. Most of what I'll be speaking to you this morning, this afternoon, for some of you, is already written somewhere in our documents. But particularly today, I was asked to share about our center's experience in interfaith dialogue and peace-building activities. First of all, I was delighted to learn that the organizers of this online reflection were inspired by Pope Francis' encyclical, the encyclical known as Fratelli Tutti. This encyclical gives deep reflections on brotherhood and friendship. And more striking about this encyclical is that it gives a particular attention to the human culture. And for Pope Francis, human culture is nothing to do with ideas or abstractions. It is, I quote him, I think he says it much better than myself. Culture is something that is rooted in a people, in its deepest convictions, and in its way of life. He goes on to say that ignoring the culture of a people prevents many political leaders from being able to implement an effective project that can be freely assumed and sustained over time. I can't explain it better than that. In fact, the Holy Father's encyclical confirms and gives more relevance to the mission and activities carried out by our center. That's why I'm very proud of this encyclical. And indeed, in order for us to reach out to a population as heterogeneous as the Marian society, our center has not found a better way than that of culture. Basing ourselves on the Marian cultural values, our center manages to captivate the attention of young and old people from different professions and different religious backgrounds. And why? This is simply because we are convinced that there is necessity of multiplying platforms of interreligious and intergenerational encounters in order to build bridges between people of different religious groups, to build bridges between modernity and tradition, to build bridges between the elderly and the old. And why do I think that this is an urgent issue for us, especially for our center? First and foremost, because 2/3 of the Marian population are young people. The majority of these young people are unfortunately victims of a hazardous alienation. Many of them are unaware of even the elements of their own culture, their own mother tongue, their history. They even don't know the history of the village where they grew up. Fully submerged in the ocean of globalization, this young generation finds itself without landmarks, not knowing where it comes from and not knowing where it is going, let alone what to choose. It's not surprising. So once again, I find Pope Francis' words more explicit on this subject of alienation. Pope Francis says, a land will be fruitful, people will bear fruit, and will be able to generate a future only when it gives life to relationships of belonging among its members, and only when it creates bonds of integration between generations and the various communities that make it up. That is Pope Francis saying that. Another reason why we think that it is important to promote the Malian cultural values is because of the escalating religious radicalization of our society today. It's true, officially a secular country, that is to say, a nation that recognizes the right to freedom of religious expression. However, since the infiltration of jihadist groups into our country has witnessed a rise in propaganda inciting religious radicalization and violence. Therefore, faced with such extremist tendencies that threaten peace and unity of the Malian population, it's our duty, I think, to curb all sorts of political and socio-economic interests that prevent the Malian culture from blossoming. And by so saying, I don't say that our center advocates for violent counter opposition. No, rather it is about taking advantage of the various traditional mechanisms that for decades have guaranteed alliances between different communities, alliances between different people, and for decades that have built bridges between different generations and between different religious denominations. So I would like simply to talk about 3 examples. I'm sharing 3 examples out of the many mechanisms that show how yesterday's Malian society used to educate, to reconcile, and to challenge its people in order to preserve peace and unity. I simply give you 3 examples. And the first example is what we know here as the sinankunya, call it the joking relationship. It's perhaps the best known mechanism of social cohesion in West Africa. Sinanku can be translated as symbolic or joking relatives. Call them joking cousins, as opposed to blood relatives or blood cousins. It's a kind of relationship based on patronymic names, based on surnames between different cultural communities. The Sinanku or the joking relatives do not necessarily need to have prior knowledge of each other, not at all. They can be meeting for the very first time, strangers meeting for the very first time, but simply mentioning their surnames is enough to establish a relationship that attributes rights and duties to each party. A relationship capable of pacifying even the most delicate conflict situations. For instance, in the course of a conflict between 2 people or 2 communities, for the Malian people of yesterday, it was enough to Why? People use joking languages in order to pacify situations. Because of its effectiveness, The Sinankunya was historically chosen by the Kurukanfuga Charter as one of the mechanisms for regulating the Great Mandingi society. Perhaps some of you have not heard about the Kurukanfuga Charter. Just a word about it. The Kurukanfuga Charter was established in the year 1236, and it was proclaimed at a place called Kurukanfuga, somewhere here in Mali. It is one of the oldest social institutions in the world, and would even be, if I'm not mistaken, it would be the very first codified charter on human rights. It is probably because of this historical charter that many of the social institutions, the great institutions that govern us today, have got the intuition of putting up institutions like human rights. The Mandingi people used to use the Sinankunya as a way of promoting social relationship. Forget about everything about this charter, but remember one thing, most important is that the Sinankunya, or the joking relationship, is one of the cherished principles of the historical charter of the Mandingi people, the Kurukanfuga Charter. It's a bit complex for those who have never heard about it, but anyway, it's part of our ways of regulating human relationships. The second example is that of the Koredugao. It's an example of a peacemaking mechanism in social Malian society. And the Koredugao is simply an initiatory cultural group. It is present in many Malian communities, like the Bambara community, the Malenke, the Senufo, the Minyanka, the Samogo, and so on. All these societies unanimously recognize the Koredugao as a man capable of regulating society, as having the primordial role of regulating society. At the first sight, for those who know the Koredugao is a man of laughter and comedy. He dresses like a madman. He uses abstract and abusive language. He eats almost everything. He eats anyhow. It is perhaps because of this external appearance and behavior that the Koredugao is often wrongly referred to as a jester or a clown. He is also at times compared to the troubadour of the European history. But behind all this ridiculous appearance and behavior lies invaluable wisdom. It lies priceless wisdom. For him, true wisdom presupposes self-control. It presupposes tolerance. It presupposes forgiveness, resignation, and moderation. And in fact, the Koreduga's behavior is deliberately intended to drive the onlooker into deep reflection on what is good and what is bad, on what is fitting and unfitting to do, on what is reasonable and unreasonable behavior. And for that reason, when a big conflict breaks out between traditional communities, the last resort was to call upon a Koreduga. And through his fascinating power and philosophy of tolerance and non-violence, the Koreduga almost always succeeded in reconciling people. So the Koreduga has unique and accessible mechanisms. That's what's good of him. He doesn't have sophisticated mechanisms. He simply uses accessible mechanisms of preventing and managing conflicts. Through his unusual words, his corrosive humor, his gluttony, and his unconventional ways of dressing, the Koreduga makes people laugh and thus helps people to manage emotions in their various forms. He helps people to manage frustrations, to manage anger, sadness, fear, and so on. It is therefore our conviction as a center that the wisdom and attitudes of the Koreduga are values that modern societies can profitably imitate, even though the Koreduga's ways of doing are unprofessional in the modern sense of the word. But we think that his attitudes towards life can be very useful for modern society and can be a true weapon for reconciliation and nonviolence. I go on to the third and last traditional mechanism of dialogue and peace building in our West African society, especially in Mali. And this is the balafon. You can call it a xylophone. The balafon is also as bala in Bambara or jegere in the Senfo language. It is a large xylophone made of several wooden blades or wooden bars placed in parallel on top of dried calabashes. And these calabashes are used as resonators. This musical instrument plays a big role in resolving social conflicts. First of all, its physical appearance clearly manifests its social role as a symbol of unity and in diversity. Its blades, the many blades and of different sizes, symbolize true fraternity, true brotherhood. Just as the balafon needs several blades, just as it needs several bars of different sizes in order to produce a pleasant sound, so are our human communities. In spite of our differences, we are bound to work together in order to build a harmonious society. And I think this initiative is a good example that brings people together, that makes bridges, builds bridges between people. And I'm very happy about this. In fact, in several traditional Malian societies, at the appropriate moments, members of the community gather in public places around the balafon to celebrate life. They offer sacrifices in thanksgiving to their ancestral gods for the protection that they give them. But at the same moment, it is an occasion to implore the divine mercy and pardon for the society's wrongdoings. Consequently, even every member of the society is bound to prepare him or herself for the event in order to be prepared in the best way possible. For example, anybody in a conflictual situation is obliged to seek means of reconciliation before participating in the social gathering. Failure to do this may have impacts on the whole society. The gods, for example, might not accept the sacrifices offered by the community simply because of one or two individuals. And so by accepting to participate in such public and social events, each individual reaffirms his or her attachment and commitment to the society. Refusal to participate in such social gatherings is self-isolation and separation from society, which is really undesirable. So for that matter, our center has chosen to promote the values of this emblematic music instrument. Our center has often participated in festivals that promote the balafon, such as what we call Le Festival du Triangle du Balafon here in Mali. It is a social event that brings together three countries, namely Mali, Burkina Faso, and Ivory Coast. These three countries not only share the same borders, but they also have several cultural practices in common. So every 2 years, these countries gather around the balafon to magnify and to promote their fraternity, to promote their brotherhood, to promote their unity. From these three examples, to summarize, these three examples taken from the Malian cultural heritage, we can conclude that our strength as human societies lies in our complementarity. That is to say, in knowing how to value, how to protect, and how to promote what we have in common. That is our strength. By accepting and considering contributions from both young and old, by accepting contributions from modern and traditional society, considerations from globalized systems, as well as those from minority groups, we think, at least for our center, that we can succeed in re-establishing peace and unity that have existed in many of our traditional communities. And I think this is exactly what Pope Francis tries to say in his encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti. Pope Francis invites us, I better quote it, Pope Francis invites us to act together and dream together so that faced with today's diverse ways of eliminating or ignoring others, we may be able to respond with a new dream of fraternal friendship. That is my solemn prayer and dream for each one of us, my solemn prayer and dream for Mali in particular, and for the whole world. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Father Bruno, for this very insightful sharing and for making us discover these three very, very interesting, fascinating means of, for reconciliation and building bridges, the joking relationships, the Koreduga, and the Balafon. Really, the relationship, the life of the community, the arts, the creativity of the people that regenerates life in the community. At this point, we would like to give participants the opportunity to write their questions to Father Bruno in the chat. So we kindly ask you, if you are writing your questions in English, address them to the address chat-en. If you are writing them in French, address your question to chat-fr. And if you are writing them in Spanish, kindly address your question to chat-es. And as we give just 2-3 minutes to the participants to write their question, I would like to ask a question myself to Father Bruno. You have underscored the importance of involving young generations into a dialogue between traditional and modern society. And definitely that is really about building bridges between cultures and perspectives and generations. How do you facilitate that dialogue in very practical terms? What methodology do you employ?
Thank you, Alberto. Our methodology is none other than that what we often know in our Catholic movements: see, judge, and act. In seeing, that is our first step. We do research, and this is continued research. We have a museum with several objects, but we are conscious of the fact that culture is dynamic. Culture is not static, it changes. What we have today might not be true for tomorrow. So first of all, we see through research. This research also engages moving out to different people, most especially the elderly people in villages. These are libraries. They stock a lot of information that can be useful to us, but also to the young generation. But at the same time, we drive information to them that aspirations of the young people to try to make them aware of what is going on the other side of the card. And that is through the first step of see. Then judge. We come together as a team. We have also collaborators from different sides, government and private ones. We share our collected information with them and we ask for their view. What do you think about this? What do you think we can do to prevent this? What do you think we can do to promote this? And this is only after this that we go on to the third step of action. And action is through what I presented as our activities. Most of them are interaction activities. We come into contact, in a encounter with young people. Some of them come to our center. We organize sessions, we organize workshops, conferences. We go out to meet them in the schools. We go out to the different religious denominations, not Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, just to make sure we have a broader view of things. And it is from this collected view that we encounter young and old people. It is from this collected view that we can also publish out. I said one of our activities is to publish, is that we write out researched and informed messages that we think can contribute to the building of the bridges that we want to set up, build bridges that unite people, that unite cultures, that unite religious denominations.
Thank you very much, Father Bruno. And you should expect many more questions. I informed the participants that we will open a question and answer session at the end of the 3 presentations. So we are going to pick the questions later on. Thank you once again, Bruno.